And good afternoon, and thank you for coming. It's gorgeous outside.
Thank you for
Here on August 21st. Well, let me get over here because you can see better. That is Times Square back in 1908. And that is the year that we're going to be talking about. Let's see in here, let's get that there. This is the year we're going to be talking about, 1908. And it's a year that sort of modern, and it's sort of not modern. Modern Times Square. How many of you watch the ball drop now every New Year's Eve on TV?
We used to.
We used to. Well, the first time it ever happened was on January 1st, 1908. Take Me Out to the Ball Game.
Yeah.
It's the song.
It's a song.
The song. It comes out in 1908, but is it about baseball? Might not be about baseball. Taft is elected president of the United States. Immigration is a major problem in the United States. People said that the immigrants coming over were not good people. They were prone to commit crimes, and they were idiots. That was 1908. And we'll get into a little more after that. Theodore Roosevelt says goodbye. But before he leaves, he sends out the Navy around the world to show that America is pretty strong, and even though we're coming in peace, well, you know what? We're pretty strong. Springfield, Illinois, there's a riot, and also there are lynchings. Jack Johnson becomes the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. He's the first African American who has ever won the boxing title. The Bosnian crisis starts. It's a minor crisis in Europe at the time in 1908, very minor. The Model T. How many of you would like to own a 1908 Model T car today? Today, in good condition. Well, it makes its debut in 1908. There is a car race around the world in 1908 featuring 6 drivers. This is the Singer Building in Lower Manhattan. It would become the first skyscraper in New York. It would be the largest building in the world. And Wilbur Wright, well, he's up in his plane at the end of December, and there he is flying around demonstrating what you can do in a plane. Life in 1908. The year begins with the first New Year's Eve ball dropping at Times Square and ends with Wilbur Wright's record-setting demonstration flight of about 2 hours and 20 minutes. Henry Ford introduces the Model T. 6 automobiles leave Times Square, and they're going in a race around the world. And you're going to say, how could they do that with all that water? But we'll explain. There was a race riot with lynchings that rocked Springfield, Illinois. America was on par with Britain and Germany as a global power. U.S. citizens enjoyed the highest per capita income in the world, complete with railroads, automobiles, telegraph, telephone, electricity, and gas. Men shaved their whiskers with disposable razor blades, and women tidied up their homes with a remarkable new device called the vacuum cleaner. Couples danced to the old Victrola record player in their living rooms and snuggled in the dark in theaters to watch the flickering images of the Vitagraph. And there was one film in particular where that came out that year that you probably know all about. Life in America wasn't all that great, though. These are teenagers in a steel mill. A vast number of Americans lived in poverty or near poverty. The working class included some 2 million children who joined adults in the steel mills, coal mines, laboring long hours in occupations that were grueling and often dangerous. Tens of thousands of Americans died on the job in 1908. The average American worker earned between $200 and $400 a year. Today that would be about $6,800 to $13,600. 22 cents an hour was the average wage in the United States, $7.51 today, but it's more money than the federal minimum wage of today. Federal the federal minimum wage is at $7.25. It has not gone up since 2009, so maybe the average worker back in 1908 is making a little more money than the people making federal minimum wage in the United States. America was a nation of 46 states. 90% of the people were white. More than half the population lived in rural areas. North Dakota and Montana were still open to homesteaders. The Arizona and New Mexico territories were largely unsettled. Florida's southern half has a wilderness of mangrove swamps, lots of oranges. America also included territories in Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. The nation was unfair in many ways, unpleasant and violent. Kids worked in coal mines and steel mills. In 26 states, marriage between whites and blacks was illegal. Yet, people are still coming to the United States in 1908. That's in New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty. And they're saying, come. Emma Lazarus' poem, come. But there were a lot of people who said, don't come. We don't want you. The melting pot. You've heard about melting pots, right? Well, the melting pot entered the American lexicon, coined by a playwright by the name of Israel Zangwill, to denote the nation's capacity to absorb and assimilate different ethnicities and cultures. Except he wasn't being positive about that. According to Zangwill, the melting pot was a cauldron, roaring and bubbling and stirring and seething. It was not a pleasant place, America of 1908. Violence erupted frequently. Anarchists ignited bombs. Gangs of loosely organized extortionists, known as the Black Hand, dynamited tenements in New York's Little Italy. Armies of disgruntled tobacco farmers, called the Night Riders, galloped through Kentucky and Tennessee, spreading terror. However, oil is discovered in Persia, and that would come back many, 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 many years later to bite the Americans. The women's movement around the world was growing. Happy New Year, 1908. Well, Times Square, New Year's Eve, synonymous around the world today with a good time. However, when it started out back at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, well, all of a sudden the Oaks family, owner of the Times, had this land right in the middle of Manhattan, and they decided they needed to sell newspapers. And what better way to sell a newspaper? Have a New Year's Eve party. And that's how it all started. The ball comes in 1907, 1908. It's December 31st, 1907, that the New Year's Eve ball made its maiden descent from the flagpole atop Times Square. As part of the 1907-1908 festivities, waiters in the fabled lobster palaces and other deluxe eateries in hotels surrounding Times Square were supplemented or supplied with battery-powered top hats emblazoned with the numbers 1908, little light bulbs lighting up saying 1908. At the stroke of midnight, they all flip their lids, and the year 1908 appears on all their foreheads from the parapet of the Times Tower, lighting up to signal the beginning of a new year. Take me out to the ball game. How many of you know that song? Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. So let me ask you a question. You know that part of the song. Is it a man or a woman who's singing that part of the song? Is it a man or is it a woman?
Well,
You don't know? Could it be a man? Could it be a woman? Anyway, and is it a baseball song? Well, yeah, it is a baseball song in a sense. Yeah, well, Jack Norworth claimed he scribbled the words on an envelope of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" after seeing a sign on the New York City subway that read, "Baseball Today, Polo Grounds." All those signs in the subway cars. That's long before Dr. Zinsmore and his zit treatments took up all the signs. Now it's all lawyers, ambulance chasers. Songwriters Jack Norworth and Albert von Tilzer never saw a baseball game. Never saw a baseball game. On May 2nd, the United States Copyright Office received 2 copies of a new song entitled Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And this is the original sheet of paper. Take Me Out to the Ball Game by Jack Norwood. Katie Casey was baseball mad, had the fever and had it bad. Just to root for the hometown crew, every sou, that was slang in those days for French coins, every sou, Katie blew. On a Saturday, her young beau called to see if she'd like to go to a show. But Miss Kate said no. I'll tell you what you can do. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. So it's established. It is a woman telling her boyfriend, listen, I don't want to go to the show. I want to go see a baseball game. Women were not supposed to be at baseball games in 1908. Not at all. So what's the song really about? Well, it might be about the new woman movement. The song was written as Jack Norwood's ode to his girlfriend, the progressive and outspoken Trixie Forganza, whose real name was Delia O'Callahan. She was a famous vaudeville actress and a suffrage. The covers of the 2 original editions of sheet music featured, well, Forganza. And there she is in 1908. And she's in Manhattan, and she's marching in the suffrage parade. She was a famous vaudevillian comedy actor. She was a star on the vaudeville boards by the age of 19 in 1899. She was a well-known comedic actress. Off the stage, she was an influential and prominent suffragette who advocated for women's social and political equality. At the time the song was written, women rarely attended baseball games, as the ballpark was not thought of as a place for women. The crowd was filled with gamblers and drunks, and the players were never thought of as family men. Katie Casey, she knew baseball. She was not happy with the umpires, and she would argue with them, and she was standing in the front row. She was part of the New Woman movement of the early 20th century. She took the lead. She was engaged and living in the world uninhibited and filled with passion. Now, just exactly who Katie Casey is? Well, we could surmise that she's Irish, and she's either from Brooklyn or Manhattan, and that she's fairly young because she has a beau, but she's telling the boyfriend what to do. Women didn't do that in those days. Women were polite. They always listened to men, at least publicly. So she's a radical. And there is Nora Bayes, and she is the woman who would make Take Me Out to the Ball Game famous in vaudeville. Her real name was Dora Goldberg, and she was Norwood's wife in 1908. Forganza and Norwood broke up. And that song, along with another song that she co-wrote with Jack Norwood, Shine On Harvest Moon, were hits in 1908. And I'm sure you all know of Shine On Harvest Moon. Again, the question today is, what is the more famous song of the day? Take Me Out to the Ball Game or Shine On Harvest Moon? Probably Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Bayes was a popular stage singer who starred in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1908 with Norwood. The song took off, selling 6 million copies of sheet music. Edward Meeker recorded the song for Edison Records. Movie theaters featured it during intermissions with the lyrics on the screen, encouraging people to sing along in the audience, at least the chorus. All about where Katie wants to go. Take me out to the ball game. Cracker Jack, which had been around since 1893, saw soaring sales after it was mentioned in the song. So they basically kept crackerjack business. Oddly enough, neither the National League nor the American League team owners embraced the song. It's just another song about baseball, like the baseball Pope. The Gibson Girl. Familiar with the Gibson Girl? No?
Gibson Hill.
Yeah, the Gibson Girl. Well, this girl is playing golf. Women didn't play golf. Women did not play golf in those days. It was thought improper, although she's wearing the proper attire for those days, a hat, long sleeves on the blouse, and a long flowing skirt. She's hardly showing any skin, so nobody on the golf course watching her would get excited. That was a problem the sportsmen had in those days, allegedly. The Gibson Girl was the personification of the feminine ideal of physical attraction as portrayed by the pen and ink illustrations of the artist Charles Dana Gibson. Gibson Girl, a vibrant, new, feminine ideal who was the visual embodiment of the new woman. The Gibson Girl pursued higher education, romance, marriage, physical well-being, and individuality with unprecedented independence. At the end of the 19th century, there was a growing notion with new ideas of women's sexuality and empowerment. It set the stage for the new woman movement and the beginnings of feminist writings and other publications. The new woman movement was a push for female autonomy. The new woman movement placed a heavy emphasis on independence and autonomy of oneself. That is a woman, and notice she is smoking a cigarette. She's smoking a cigarette, she's all dressed up, and well, she's there, and there's the average housewife washing clothes. There's no washing machine quite yet, but she wants to go out there and see the world, whereas she is stuck in the house doing house chores. The movement encouraged women to find economic and social stability without men. The movement pushed for educated and independent women. The new woman movement called for women to expand and be more than just the woman of the house and push into the public sphere, including politics. Politics! Women aren't supposed to talk about politics. That's men only. This is Trixie Ferganza again. A little older at this point. Members of the Women's Progressive Suffrage Union held their first suffrage march in the United States, in New York City. And Ferganza is at the October 28th rally and said, "I do not believe any man, at least no man I know, is better fitted to form a political opinion than I am." It's fighting words. That is fighting words in those days. Younger women were concerned with sexual freedom and equality and demonstrated this by experimenting with public behavior and new gender roles. Ferganza used her celebrity status to promote and further the rights of women as well as other causes, such as promoting the arts to the economically disenfranchised. Newspapers noted that many performances in which she was involved had held performances for orphans and children from lower income families. Some male intellectuals criticized the new woman movement for being consumer-oriented, morally depraved, and sexually promiscuous. These women were thought as morally depraved. It's a changing world, though. This is from New Zealand, and the women in New Zealand want the right to vote. Male electors only on that old-style bicycle with the big wheel, which is followed by a small wheel. And this woman is got the New Zealand sash, and she's riding a bicycle. Male and female, equal electoral votes. There was freedom for women, such as the ability to ride a bicycle. Think of that. Women could not ride bicycles before. But all of a sudden, they're on the bicycle, and they can travel independently and consume new products. However, the movement also faced criticism from both men and women who were uncomfortable with the changing roles of men and women. There was a concern. The new women movement endangered not only social order, but also natural order. Many in the medical communities supported the idea that development of a woman's brain caused infertility. Do you believe that? That women were not fertile because they were smart? Some people concluded that the survival of humankind was endangered by women's education back in 1908. What was that?
I said, tut-tut.
And then there's the immigration problem. This is Lower Manhattan, and as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people all piled into one room in a tenement. And pictures like this are going around the country, and people are beginning to say, what's going on in New York City? Why are all these people that we don't like, why are they all moving in? And these people were Italian Catholics, and they were Jews for the most part, coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and something had to be done. New York was not the only city with tenement buildings, but it became ground zero in the battle to limit immigration. Thousands of immigrants coming through Ellis Island to start a new life in America found affordable housing in these unsafe buildings, and the landlords were happy to let them fit as many people in a living space as possible. All they had to do was pay the rent. And the rent wasn't that high, and they did. My family came from the Lower East Side. I grew up, first 8 years of my life, on the Lower East Side on Eldridge Street through 1964. So I know a little about these buildings. If a resident became exposed to diseases like smallpox or tuberculosis, it would rapidly spread through the building. If the water became contaminated, the whole building would become ill. Something needed to be done. Immigration was a problem that needed to be solved. So, Teddy Roosevelt decides we're going to try to settle this. And he comes up...
Faces.
What?
I said it was sour faces.
Yeah, that's the Dillingham Commission. And Dillingham was a senator from Vermont, and he heads up the Senate Commission. The Dillingham Commission produced perhaps the most extensive investigation of immigration in the history of the country. 41-volume study that demonstrated just how vital 19th century and early 20th century immigrants were to the United States economy. Congress created the commission in 1907 in an effort to find a compromise between the proponents and opponents of immigration. During the previous session, or previous decades, several decades, pundits and lawmakers had debated the need to impose restrictions on immigration. There was no such thing as undocumented in those days. There was no such thing as illegal in those days, because the immigrants came in legally. How did they do that? Treaties between the United States and various countries. They basically were passed through places like Canada, ended up in Boston or New York or Galveston, Texas, were accepted by local officials, and that was how immigration was back in those days. Like I said, there was no such thing as illegal, no such thing as undocumented. That would come in 1924. Lawmakers enacted several policies intended to interdict those deemed to pose specific danger. People afflicted with contagious diseases or involved in moral turpitude. Except for this, the Chinese Exclusion Act, 1882. Who built the railroads in the United States? Chinese. But they're getting kicked out. We're also getting kicked out of Canada too. One notable act excluded Chinese laborers, and another prohibited the entry of workers who had been hired overseas by U.S. companies. The Chinese Exclusion Act was approved on May 6, 1882. Well, the goal is, see that funnel? All those people coming in, but they only want a few coming out. That's USA on the bottom, and let's cut it to like 3% of the people who want to come over. That's what they were trying to do. There was a literacy test, a requirement that most adult immigrants should be able to read or write, and that became the preferred restriction. Supporters saw it as the best means of securing the most desirable migrants, while critics saw education as a product of opportunity, not character or potential. 1907, when Congress could not agree on its propriety, it created the Dillingham Commission, named for its chairman, Senator William P. Dillingham, a Vermont Republican. This guy's an interesting guy, Dr. Franz Boas. How many of you heard of Mengele, Dr. Mengele in Nazi Germany, who performed all kind of experiments on people? He might have gotten his ideas from this guy, Dr. Franz Boas, who also came from Germany. He's part of the commission. The 9-member commission, comprising of 3 U.S. senators, 3 representatives, and 3 experts selected by the President, Theodore Roosevelt, fulfilled its charge by conducting a thorough and wide-ranging investigation of current and past immigration. Most of the work centered on immigrants in industry, but other topics included immigrants in cities, children of immigrants in schools, and a study of changes in immigrant psychology, the last conducted by the anthropologist Dr. Franz Boas. He and his associates took the head, the cranium, and they took measurements of skulls. They wanted to see if they fit what the American ideal was. So they have all these immigrant children in schools, and they concluded that the U.S. environment was endangering positive changes in bodily form. They were worried about the size of heads, and my wife would never have gotten in here because she's got a big head, if these proposals went through. The children had features less like their European counterparts and more like American types. Commissioner Jeremiah Jenks also prepared a controversial dictionary of races in which he sought to definitively identify and characterize the world's races or ethnic groups. Sounds like Nazi Germany a little bit? United States, 1908. And here's the immigrant children coming in and being checked out over at Ellis Island. As you can see, somebody is looking at them to make sure they did not have a contagious disease. Immigration. The early 20th century saw a large influx of immigrants to the United States, particularly from Southern and Eastern Europe. This wave of immigration contributed to the cultural diversity of the country. Most immigrants chose to settle in American cities where jobs were located. This guy's an interesting guy. His name is Jacob Schiff. And I had a friend, the late Shelley Saltman up in Boston. He grew up with Leonard Nimoy, Barbara Walters, Barry Morse, the actor. His mother's house was the center of politics and Marjan. Leonard Bernstein's mother was there. David Suskind's mother was there. And all the Jewish women would look at Mrs. Bernstein's word. Lenny, your son Lenny, he's good looking, he's personable, he's smart. Why is he going into music? He's never going to amount to anything in music. They were wrong. Leonard Bernstein amounted to something. Anyway, Jacob Schiff and the Galveston movement. And I was talking to a cousin of mine. I sent him a video of what I did in 1911 about the Galveston movement. And he was in Brooklyn, and I didn't know this. He now lives in Toronto, but his maternal grandparents came to the United States through Galveston, Texas. Now, Shelley told me many years ago that the rabbis in Boston and New York were worried about more and more Jews coming in and the anti-Semitism in New York and in Boston, and they really wanted to see if they could put a halt to all of the immigrants coming in and maybe send them to some other part of the United States. And Jacob Schiff is the guy that steps in. The Galveston movement, Galveston, Texas, or the Galveston Plan, was a U.S. immigration assistance program operated by several Jewish agencies starting in 1907. The program diverted Jewish immigrants fleeing Russia and Eastern Europe from East Coast cities, particularly New York. The New York financier and the philanthropist, Jacob Schiff, was the driving force behind the effort, which he supported with nearly $500,000, today $16.4 million, from his personal fortune. Now, this is the Immigration Restriction League. And Boston, June 20th, 1904, and these are the people who are on it. And they were, some of them, Harvard law grads who decided that they know better because they went to Harvard and they're lawyers and they know better than you and they know what to do with the problems of immigration in the country. Let's turn back the clock to 1845. The Immigration Restriction League was organized by Harvard graduates in 1984, headed by the president of the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And they lobbied nationally to restrict Jews and Southern Italian Catholic immigration, contending that the new immigrants who apparently also brought crime and idiocy into the country threatened the American race. In response to peaking levels of immigration, 3 Harvard alum, the lawyer Charles Warren, the climatologist Robert DeCory Ward, and another attorney, Preston F. Hall, established the Immigration Restriction League to press for laws to check the burgeoning influxes, which now originated in greater proportion from Eastern and Southern Europe. In other words, these guys basically are, well, it's xenophilia. They don't want foreigners in unless they're from England or Germany, maybe France or Scandinavia, but we don't want those Irish Catholics here either. And here's the constitution of the Immigration Restriction League, founded by these Harvard people. The Immigration Restriction League and other restrictions claimed authority. This is where they claimed authority from. Social Darwinist beliefs. Well, who left them in charge? Nobody. Nobody. But that's where, we're from Harvard. We're better than everybody else here. So we know best. And we're going to go and we're going to quote Charles Darwin's beliefs. And the science of eugenics to advocate a literacy test as a measure to keep out the non-assimilating and the undeserving. This is a pogrom. Dead Jews laying there. Dead Jews being mourned by the people in the community. That's going on regularly in Russia. People want to escape. I don't know if you remember Bill Mazer, the announcer. Bill told me one day that his father and family had to get out because they fought back. And he, according to Bill, his father killed someone, so they had to flee as quickly as they could. Increased anti-Semitic pogroms in Tsarist Russia starting in the early 1880s led to a tidal wave of Jewish immigration to the United States. That included my grandfather, or both grandfathers. That established Jewish elite, or the Jewish elite, the established Jewish elite in America had long sought to increase U.S. government diplomatic involvement to help alleviate similar situations in Europe and strongly support continued open immigration generally as a way to accomplish this. Schiff engineered the Galveston movement, which diverted Russian Jewish immigrants away from New York to the port of Galveston, Texas, from which point they found new homes throughout the South and the Midwest. Some of these people were named Neiman and Marcus. Ever hear of those guys? They ended up as part of this group, Neiman and Marcus. Schiff hoped that this would stem a wave of anti-Semitism that seemingly fueled by visions of crowded New York City tenements. And so that's what happened here. Here is an inspection card. Port of departure, Bremen, Germany. And it's for Sarah Bernstein. And she's ready to go. This is from 1913, this card, but it's similar to the cards that other people got to come to the United States. The Jewish Immigration Information Bureau, based in Galveston, Texas, directed the movement as a means of preventing an anticipated wave of anti-Semitism on the eastern seaboard, which might lead to immigration restrictions. It sought to find suitable alternative destinations for the influx of immigrants. Charleston, South Carolina was the first city that was considered, then New Orleans, and then Galveston. Charleston, despite its long-established Jewish community, wanted WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon immigrants. New Orleans, a thriving urban center where Jews might have been inclined to settle instead of moving into the interior. Well, there were outbreaks of yellow fever, so that was not desirable. And there was the rabbi, Henry Cohn, in Galveston. and he's the head of the congregation B'nai Israel, and he organizes the Galveston movement. The Jewish Immigrant Information Bureau worked to attract Jews emigrating from the Russian Empire and Eastern Europe to Galveston and the Gulf Coast. Cohen and other Texas Jewish leaders wanted to not only strengthen Jewish communities in Texas and the center of the country, but also lessen potential conflicts arising from heavy immigration to the Northeast and prevent restrictions on immigration passed by Congress. Jewish Immigrants Information Bureau, Galveston, Texas. Dear sirs, this will inform you that Sarah Bernstein arrived safely. Yours truly. So it worked. Galveston was judged as the best. Its small size would not encourage a large number of Jews to settle there permanently, and it provided convenience and closer access to the growing economic opportunities in Texas, whether that's Houston or Dallas, the Midwest, and the American West. The Jewish immigrants would start arriving shortly after the program started, but the overcrowding in New York is still a major concern, and something needed to be done. But what? There was no solution in 1908, and we're talking 116 years later, and they're still talking about this. The bully culprit, Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt is saying goodbye to the White House. After his 1904 electoral victory, Theodore Roosevelt promised publicly not to seek the presidency in 1908. He vigorously promoted William Howard Taft as his successor. Both Nellie Taft, Taft's wife, and Roosevelt had to persuade Taft to make the race. Even with the presidency within his reach, Taft much preferred getting a U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice appointment. Up to the last minute before Taft's nomination at the Republican convention in Chicago, Nellie Taft feared that Roosevelt might announce his bid for a second term. See, Nellie Taft was politically, well, she was a go-getter, and she had a problem. Even though she was the go-getter and was politically ambitious, she couldn't do anything about it. Why? You know why? She's a woman. So she was living vicariously through her husband. Only when Roosevelt sent word via the senator from Massachusetts, Henry Cabot Lodge, that he was not available, did the convention nominate Taft on the first ballot. And there is William Howard Taft, who hated campaigning. Taft's campaign, once it started, depended heavily upon Roosevelt's speech-making, advice, and energy. Journalists bombarded the public with jokes about Taft being a substitute for Roosevelt. One columnist, because they didn't have comics on TV, late-night comics on TV doing this, so it was in the columns those days, explained that TAFT stood for Take Advice from Theodore. Johnny Carson said that, you would have laughed. Nothing could hide Taft's dislike for campaigning and politics. His handlers tried to turn his sluggish style into a positive asset by describing Taft as a new kind of politician, one who refuses to say anything negative about his opponent. For most voters, it was enough. Taft had pledged to carry on Roosevelt's policies. And he's running against William Jennings Bryan, who had lost the presidency or the presidential race in 1896 and 1900 to William McKinley. So he is running again for a third time. He was a populist, and he still had some silverites that were supporting him. Make silver the currency of America back in 1896, 16 silver pieces equaling 1 gold piece. That never went anywhere. He reestablished his control of the Democratic Party, won the endorsement of numerous local and state organizations. Conservative Democrats again sought to prevent Bryan's nomination, but they were unable to unite around an alternate candidate. So he's nominated for president on the first ballot of the Democratic National Convention, and he's joined by John W. Kern, a former state senator from the swing state of Indiana. Indiana was once a swing state. And there is Bryant, who is a great orator, just a great orator. He campaigned on a party platform that reflected his long-held beliefs, but the Republican platform also advocated for progressive policies, which left relatively few differences between the parties. One issue the two parties differed on was on deposit insurance or bank insurance. Bryant wanted national banks to provide deposit insurance. You know, you put your money in the bank goes bust, you lose all your money. And basically he wanted the federal government to guarantee that you won't lose all your money. But that didn't happen in 1908. Bryant largely unified the leaders of his own party, and his pro-labor policies won him the first presidential endorsement ever issued by the American Federation of Labor. As in his previous campaigns, Bryant embarked on a public speaking tour to boost his candidacy. Bud Taft wins. His vice president is James S. Sherman. He carried all but 3 states outside the Democratic Solid South, won 321 electoral votes compared to Bryant's 162. Taft got about 7.7 million votes, 51.6% of the electorate. Bryant, 6.4 million, 43%. And the socialist candidate, Eugene V. Debs, 420,793 votes, about 2.8% of the popular vote. Bryant and Clay were the only candidates who received electoral votes in 3 separate presidential elections. They lost all 3 elections. So was Teddy Roosevelt a racist? That is outside the Museum of Natural History. That statue's not there anymore. It was taken down because, well, Roosevelt didn't have much use for Native Americans, and on the other side of the statue is an African American, and with the blessing of his family members, years later, they took this statue down. It's been retired. On September 14, 1901, Theodore Roosevelt became the 26th President of the United States following the assassination of President William McKinley. Roosevelt had been Vice President for about 194 days when he succeeded to the presidency. Well, what made him great? Well, he avoided labor strikes, notably negotiating a settlement to the Great Coal Strike of 1902. He vigorously promoted the conservation movement, emphasizing efficient use of natural resources. He dramatically expanded the system of national parks and national forests. He created 5 national parks and battled mining interests to name the Grand Canyon one of 16 national monuments. Roosevelt also oversaw the creation of 20 federal irrigation projects, 13 national forests, and 16 bird refuges. And here he is. He's getting the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1906. He steered the nation toward an active role in world politics, particularly in Europe and Asia. He won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1906 for mediating an end to the Russian-Japanese War, and he secured the route and began construction of the Panama Canal. In 1908, he invited state leaders and scientists to the White House for a conference on conservation of natural resources. As a result, 41 states created conservation commissions, and the National Conservation Commission was established. However, there is the other side to Roosevelt. He didn't see all black Americans as equals. As a race and in mass, they are altogether inferior to whites, he confided to a friend in a 1906 letter. Roosevelt also believed that black men made poor soldiers. He denigrated the efforts of the Buffalo Soldiers who fought alongside his men at San Juan Hill during the Spanish-American War in 1898, falsely claiming that they ran away under fire. Negro troops were shirkers in their duties and would only go as far as they were led by white officers, he wrote. Except, yes, Booker T. Washington in the White House for dinner, and Booker T. Washington would be one of his advisors, Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington. Roosevelt thought that African Americans were inferior to white citizens, but he invites Booker T. Washington, one of the leading philosophers of his time and an African American, to dine at the White House on October 16, 1901, but he also dismissed 160 black soldiers from service, assuming they colluded in a criminal shooting spree. But while the governor in New York, a distinguished colored singer, was denied in Albany, New York in one of the hotels. The circumstance reached Roosevelt. He went in person and he invited the citizen to his residence where he gave him lodging. When he assumed the office of vice president, his first act was to appoint a colored man, an executive messenger against the protest of certain officials. He was the first president of the United States to entertain a colored man, Booker T. Washington. But was he a racist? Did he believe in eugenics? The answer is yes. Roosevelt's considerable time spent ranching in the Dakota Territory only hardened his mindset against Native Americans. I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indian is a dead Indian, he said in 1886, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are, and I shouldn't like to inquire too closely into the case of the 10th. The most vicious cowboy has more moral principle than the average Indian. As president, he favored the removal of many Native Americans from their ancestral territories, including approximately 86 million acres of tribal land transferred to the nation's forest system. Roosevelt's signature achievements of environmental conservation and the establishment of national parks came at the expense of the people who stewarded the land for years. So, was he a racist? Was he a eugenicist? His racial philosophy of white supremacy dovetailed with his support of eugenics and that movement, which advocated selective breeding to engineer a race of people with more desirable characteristics and sterilization of less desirable people, such as criminals, people with developmental disabilities, and for some, people of color. And he shared similar views on race, such as with prominent figures as Alexander Graham Bell, John D. Rockefeller, Winston Churchill. All of them supported the eugenics movement. But that is the Grand Canyon, and Roosevelt basically saved the Grand Canyon from mining. Roosevelt also supported the policies of assimilation for indigenous Americans to become integrated into the broader part of American society. These policies over time contributed to the decimation of Native culture and communities. Roosevelt viewed Native Americans as impediments to the white settlement of the United States and believed that white frontiersmen had to forge a new race, the American race, by ceaseless strife waged against wild men and wild nature. America was two countries, white men ruling and the Jim Crow caste system for Negroes. Speak Softly by Carry a Big Stick, U.S. fleet entering Sydney Harbor in Australia. On a bright, windless morning of December 16, 1907, thousands of spectators went to Hampton Roads, Virginia, to hail the departure of the Great White Fleet on its 43,000-mile voyage around the world. Roosevelt steamed in from Chesapeake Bay aboard the presidential yacht, the Mayflower, to give a few last-minute instructions to fleet commanders and to add his considerable heft to the pomp and circumstances. It's all designed to send a message. Speak softly, carry a big stick. The Great White Fleet, a group of 16 U.S. naval battleships, visited several countries and harbors as part of a 14-month voyage around the world. The fleet's purpose? To demonstrate American goodwill, but more important, naval power to the world. Ships were painted white, the Navy's peacetime color, and decorated with gilded scrollwork, red, white, and blue banners on the bows. But Roosevelt made it clear, don't mess with the United States. These are the Springfield riots, and they would be sort of a turning point in American history, sort of a turning point in American history. That's a black neighborhood in Springfield, Illinois. Violence against African Americans persisted with dozens of lynchings. On August 14th, whites in Springfield, Illinois, ironically the hometown and resting place of Abraham Lincoln, tried to drive black citizens from the city by burning black businesses and homes and lynching 2 black men. After being accused of unrelated sexual assault and murder crimes, 2 black men were sitting in jail. Tension was rising as a large mob of about 5,000 white people were gathering outside, trying to take matters into their own hands. They were demanding the release of George Richardson and Joe James. George, who was accused of raping a white woman, and Joe, who was accused of murdering a white man. Here's the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in those days: 4 whites, 6 Negroes, dead, 70 wounded, militia in control. As police were sensing danger, the county sheriff, with the help of Harry Looper, a white business owner, secretly removed the 2 prisoners through a back door, put them on the train, transported them to another jail in Bloomington, Illinois. Once the mob learned of this move, they erupted in mass racial violence. The mob headed toward the black neighborhoods, looting and damaging black-owned businesses, destroying their homes, and eventually lynching 2 important members of the black community, Scott Burton and 84-year-old William Donegal. Springfield endured racial violence for days until the Illinois governor, Charles Deneen, called the Illinois National Guard to bring the riots under control. About 150 participants were arrested. None were ever, well, not none, just a few were ever convicted of a crime because the police didn't care, were probably in on it, and the judicial system didn't care. They were probably in on it too. That's the way it was back then. Mob spirit rules, but it's called minor outbreaks in this newspaper, minor outbreaks at Springfield, Illinois. Many died, including both black and white residents. Dozens of black-owned homes and businesses were burned to the ground, causing property damage of over $150,000. Today, about $5.1 million. Thousands of black residents packed up their families and moved out of Springfield. Some never returned. Joe James was eventually tried, convicted, and hanged for the murder of clergy Ballard. George Richardson was set free after his accuser, Mabel Hallam, recanted her story. It's Jack Johnson. He's a heavyweight champion of the world, starting in 1908, and that's when he wins the title. Jack Johnson swiftly rose to prominence in the world of boxing, capturing the world colored heavyweight title in 1903. However, his potential white opponents persistently dismissed him. On December 26, Jack Johnson defeated the reigning champion Tommy Burns, Sydney, Australia, becoming the first black man to hold the heavyweight championship of the world. Johnson would change boxing that day and challenge white supremacy. There's this little thing called the Bosnian crisis, which most people just wrote off saying, just another problem in Europe, nothing to write home about, no big deal. The Bosnian crisis erupted on October 5th when Austria-Hungary announced the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were territories within the sovereignty of the Ottoman Empire, but under Austro-Hungarian administration since 1878. The action sparked protests from all the great powers: France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Japan, Russia, and the United States, and Austria-Hungary's Balkan neighbors, Serbia and Montenegro. But it was thought to be just another European incident without really any implications, although Russia would get more involved in the area with a wary eye on Austria-Hungary. Want to own that car? Want to put it together and own it? It's the Model T. Here's my wife with my friend Don Cundy. It is the Henry Ford Museum, and that's one of the displays looking at the Model T from 1908. The Model T was introduced. Henry Ford wanted the Model T to be affordable, simple to operate, and durable. The vehicle was one of the first mass production vehicles, allowing Ford to achieve his aim of manufacturing the universal car. The Ford Motor Company could sell the vehicle for somewhere between $260, that would be $8,900 today, and $850, about $29,000 today, which is the price of the average car today, as Henry Ford passed production savings on to his customers. The vehicle became famous for its unique nickname, the Tin Lizzie. Possible origins include the popularity of the female name Lizzie during that period to a famous Model T race car named Old Lizzie. New York to Paris car race. So how do you get to New York to Paris if there's oceans between the United States and the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean? Well, they had it all figured out. The New York to Paris race was a 21,000-mile automobile race that took place from February 12th to July 30th. The race, which featured 6 cars, was a considerable challenge for the drivers who faced many obstacles, including getting to Asia. The race route crossed the United States, Canada, Japan, Siberia, and Eastern Europe, and there were few paved roads and no gas stations along the way. The state of the automobile technology at the time made the race difficult. The drivers faced snowdrifts, Arctic cold, and other changing weather conditions. In Alaska, which the drivers had to cross in order to arrive to the Bering Strait, which separated the American wilderness from the Russians, the race organizers started in the middle of winter in the hope that the strait would be frozen, which it was. The course then led through Siberia, which no one had traveled by car, before heading to the final stretch, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Berlin, and Paris, 22,000 miles in an age where the horse was considered more reliable than the horseless carriage. And this guy, the Prince, Scipion Borghese, wins. And he had help from donkeys and mules to pull the car. He had to sip oily water from his radiator to relieve his thirst. And his reward for winning, a bottle of champagne. The Singer Building in Lower Manhattan, it's not there anymore, but it's part of the financial district. Located at Broadway and Liberty Street in Lower Manhattan, New York City, the Singer Building was originally constructed in 1896 by Ernest Flagg for Frederick Bourne, the then president of the Singer Sewing Machine Company Corporation. Anybody own the Singer Sewing Machine? You did. Is it good? Is it a reliable machine?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I had it for a long time.
Yeah. My grandfather had a pants factory, and every sewing machine in there run by Schimmel and Isaac. And they were the ones who made the pants. It was a Singer sewing machine. The original structure was red brick and stone with a mansard roof. In 1906, 7 years after the completion of the first building, work began on the new building, which was to incorporate the old structure while becoming the tallest building in the world. The new building was considered to be an engineering feat, towering over the city. The only taller structure in the world was the Eiffel Tower. Visitors could pay a fee of 50 cents, $17 today, to enjoy the view from the 40th floor observation deck. Most observation decks, well, in Seattle, it's like $28, but at the top of Space Needle, it's cheap, $17. This is an asteroid, the Tunguska asteroid that hit somewhere in Siberia. On June 30th, the asteroid plunged into Earth's atmosphere and exploded in the skies of Siberia. Local eyewitnesses in the sparsely populated region reported seeing a fireball and hearing a large explosion. They also reported massive forest fires and trees blown over for miles. Because of the low population density, very few human casualties resulted, but many herds of reindeer perished. Was it a fireball? I don't know. They weren't there. You couldn't see it. And we leave with Wilbur Wright. How many of you would like to be in a plane sitting like that? Now, not only that, look how he's dressed up. He's dressed up in the three-piece suit, complete with a tie, the exaggerated collar, and he's flying. And he's flying, and he is flying. On December 31st at Camp Avores, which is 6.8 miles east of Le Mans, France, Wilbur Wright flew a 1907 Wright Flyer, a distance of 124.7 kilometers, or 77.48 miles, over a triangular course in 2 hours, 20 minutes, 23 seconds, setting a record for duration and distance. He won the first Michelin trophy and 20,000 francs as a prize, an estimated $10 million today. So what's the legacy from 1908 besides if women became smart, they'd become infertile? Well, that's Times Square today. It's become a spectacle. And of course, it's on TV. The Times Square ball has been lowered every year since 1907-08, with the exceptions in 1942-43, when the ceremony was suspended due to the wartime dim-out of lights in New York City. Nevertheless, the crowd still gathered in Times Square in those years and greeted the New Year with a minute of silence, followed by the ringing of chimes from sound trucks parked at the base of the tower. Two American networks, Disney's ABC and Warner Brothers Discovery's CNN, provide long hours of coverage of the Times Square ball drop. Dick Clark, how many of you watched Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve back in the day? Well, that first aired on December 31st, 1972. Take Me Out to the Ball Game, MGM's gay Technicolor musical with Frank Sinatra and Esther Williams and Gene Kelly and Betty Garrett and others. It ranks the song in survey polls as one of the top 10 songs of the 20th century, and is third only to Happy Birthday and the Star-Spangled Banner as one of the most easily recognizable songs in America. Jack Norwood saw his first baseball game in 1928. Albert Von Tilzer went to his first baseball game in 1940, 32 years after he wrote the music. Take Me Out to the Ball Game was honored as the 2008 Songwriters Hall of Fame towering song. Crackerjack has replaced the toy gift inside the package with a QR code, which can be used to download a baseball-themed game. There's Roosevelt on the left, Taft on the right. They had a falling out. They had been friends since about 1890. Taft's conservatism angered Roosevelt, so he challenged Taft for the party nomination at the 1912 Republican National Convention. When Taft and his conservative allies narrowly prevailed, Roosevelt rallied his progressive supporters and launched a third-party bid. Woodrow Wilson won the 1912 presidential election because of the split. Taft would become the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in 1921. Theodore Roosevelt Park, that was a couple of weeks ago when I was there. Theodore Roosevelt is widely regarded as the first modern president of the United States. He made the president, rather than the political parties or Congress, the center of American politics. Roosevelt's progressive platform encompassed nearly every progressive ideal later enshrined in the New Deal of his distant cousin Franklin Roosevelt, the Fair Deal of Harry S. Truman, the New Frontier of John F. Kennedy, and the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. But he embraced eugenics and apparently had a strong belief in white supremacy. That is the border between San Diego, well, actually it's south of San Diego, and Tijuana, Mexico. That little kid is now 41 years old. But anyway, that is the Mexican-U.S. border. About 10,000 Jewish immigrants went to Galveston between 1909 and 1911. In 1924, the Johnson-Reed immigration law imposed severe quotas on people from certain areas of the world who wanted to become Americans. Reed proclaimed in the New York Times in an op-ed piece in 1924 that America's days as a melting pot were over. There have been few revisions to the act, but build the wall, immigration, illegal aliens, undocumented are major buzzwords in political campaigns, and seemingly no politician from any side of the political spectrum has a solution. But pundits on cable TV networks, I did my punditry on MSNBC and Sam Donaldson's ABC show, make money off the issue. However, none of these TV pundits or newspaper op-ed contributors or talk radio experts have a solution. That is W.E.B. Du Bois. That is up in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And there is a little historic area in Great Barrington where he supposedly grew up. But the only things that are there are these little posters or placards that talk about his work. Less than a month prior to William Howard Taft's inaugural on February 12, 1909, the date of Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was established in New York by an interracial group of activists, partially in response to the 1908 Springfield race riot in Illinois. Jack Johnson gets a pardon in 2018. He held his boxing title until 1915, White society didn't like him. There were race riots following his fights with the Great White Hope contenders, and the political elites eventually had him arrested. On May 24, 2018, United States President Donald Trump pardoned Jack Johnson, convicted of violating the Mann Act in 1913 by taking his white girlfriend across state lines for immoral purposes. And I know a lot of people who probably could have been arrested for the same thing. I won't name any names here, and I know the statute of limitations are up for me, so we'll leave it at that. Johnson surrendered to U.S. authorities in 1920. He served 10 months in prison. Johnson's story was the focus in the Pulitzer Prize-winning Broadway play, The Great White Hope, starring James Earl Jones in 1969. A 2006 book, Unforgivable Blackness, The Rise and Fall of Jack Johnson, was turned into a PBS special. That little thing in Bosnia, well, turns into be a major thing by June 28, 1914. The immediate cause of World War I was the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. Serbian nationalist terrorist group called the Black Hand sent groups to assassinate the Archduke on June 28, 1914. The Black Hand had been plotting some sort of revenge for the Austrian annexation of Bosnia in 2008. Well, there's one of Ford's cars that's in the museum. On June 16, 1903, Henry Ford and 12 others invested $28,000, slightly more than $1 million today, and created the Ford Motor Company. First car built by the company was sold July 15, 1903. In the 19 years of the Model T's existence, Ford sold 15,500,000 of those cars in the United States, 1 million more in Canada, 250,000 in Great Britain. The motor age arrived owing mostly to Ford's vision of the car as the ordinary man's utility rather than a rich man's luxury. Ford, though, was truly a terrible person, although Adolf Hitler thought very highly of him. And that is Kitty Hawk, 1903, and the Wright brothers in the first plane. Wilbur Wright died of typhoid fever, May 30th, 1912, at the age of 45. Wilbur Wright, along with his brother Orville, achieved international fame by designing, building, and flying the first airplane on December 17th, 1903, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Their contributions to aviation remain unparalleled. Thank you very much. Any questions, any comments?